Hello, Peter.
Hi
Good to
there.
have you. Hello. Thanks for joining. Really looking forward to having a chat about everything that relates to getting our marketing activities, media activities, a little bit more effective. Before we begin, might be good. I think you're one of the big names in our industry, but maybe there are a couple of people who just jumped in or just are a little bit late to the game to do a little introduction about your history, what you do, how you got here.
No, sure, absolutely. So I describe myself as an effectiveness kind of obsessee. I've been working with lots of effectiveness data, but particularly the UK IPA Effectiveness Databank for about 20 years now, mining it for insights into what does and doesn't work. And that has taken me in lots of different directions. So obviously I've done a lot of work with Les Binet, and we've published many reasonably well-read works like The Long and the Short of It. It's also led me to collaborate with lots of other people, most recently with Adam Morgan and Dr. Karen Nelson Field on the Cost of Dull project, which I see as the really, really critical issue for effectiveness right now. It takes me way beyond the work that Les and I did on effectiveness in the various books that we've published, and explains some of the observations that we made, and indeed some of the kind of niggles that I had with the data in trying to explain the real patterns. I've also done a lot of work on creativity and its contribution to effectiveness. Les and I have worked on B2B effectiveness, tried to pull out some of the lessons that we can apply to that. So trying really to follow up any areas that I find interesting and important, but always evidence-based. I mean, there is far too much, I think, opinion generally in the world of marketing and to some degree business. And I think we need to bring it back to evidence, but we also have to accept, of course, that marketing is not a precise science. And so evidence is vital, but we always have to interpret around evidence and be aware that in an imprecise field like marketing, there is room for the craft, for gut instinct and feel and all the rest of it. So we have to allow space for that. And I think that's what's been most interesting to me over the years I've been working with this, trying to marry those two sides.
Yeah. Well, I think let's talk about your first marriage. At least the marriage that I initially know you from is with Les Binet. How did that sort of come about to work on the long and short of it? I think it's the first time that I, many years ago, dove into it, starting to look at those data points, those patterns. How did you two guys get to work together, and what were your main findings? I'm really interested to cover the B2B part and the cost of dull. But if we go back a little bit in time, how did you get started there?
Well, I mean, Les and I have known each other since we were students. We're a good friend in common. We're both godfathers to the same child, who's our friend's son. So I've known him for many, many years. And it turned out that we were both working with the IPA data. We'd both been involved in setting up the data bank. I was busy trying to write a chapter for an academic textbook on effectiveness. And I'd said to the editor, look, I will only do this if I can use hard data. It needs to be evidence-based. So I've been crunching the data. Les had been crunching the data himself. And the IPA said, you guys, do you know each other? You should work together on this. And we said, well, we've known each other for years. We just didn't know we were each doing this. So that's how it first started. Our first publication was Marketing the Era of Accountability, which was back in 2007 or so. Very kind of academic type of approach, very full of numbers, full of charts, very full of data. Found an academic audience to a degree. Didn't really make big noise in the world. So when we moved forward to The Long and the Short of It, which was our second one, we tried to make it more readable, but also we we took advantage of the fact we had a load more data and we could pick up on a particular issue that had begun to concern us back in 2007, which was the difference between long-term and short-term effectiveness and how it kind of led you in different directions. And we didn't really have enough data back in 2007 when we were writing Marketing in the Era of Accountability to really land the danger of it. In fact, this was the early days. We know that the cusp point when effectiveness really started to go pear-shaped, as we say in the UK, started to decline dramatically, was around about 2007, 2008. So we were writing really at our first work at the point where these things weren't known. You know, the danger wasn't really there then. So we identified it, but no one picked it up. We wrote the long and the short of it. In 2012, 2013, it came out. We then had enough data to say, look, this long and short issue is real and it's beginning to bite and we can see it. But I think we weren't believed. I mean, you know, it's the readership of that particular book has grown over time. I mean, I think most business books spike and then kind of slowly disappear. That one's actually kind of grown over time because I think at first the truth that lay within it was disputed and derided. Anyway, anyone from a tech and a performance marketing background said, oh, this is rubbish. This is last millennium's thinking. But the truth of it has come home to roost because we have seen some dramatic declines in effectiveness. And when you actually come back to the root causes, you'll see that at the heart of the problem is this obsession with short-term effectiveness. But it leads us in many, many more directions than we'd ever considered at the time. You know, it's not just about objectives and metrics. It's about the kinds of creative we run, and it's also about the kinds of platforms we run that creative on. And these are all interrelated. You know, what you go for, what you measure ends up being what you get. And if you go for short-term effectiveness, which is what so many businesses are, it runs across everything you do in communications and seriously undermines long-term effectiveness. So, you know, that was for us the big worry point. And we built on that with later works where we looked at effectiveness in context and a particular look at different media. We published a volume on media as well. So we've kind of built it out, but I think the long and the short of it is the one that probably is the one we're most well known for.
Yeah, I think so too. At least that's also what got me, and I think a lot of other people that are a bit more evidence-based, interested in reading up. To what extent do you think the fact that the technology that at that time, you know, was growing, was giving us the opportunity to measure everything? At least we have an attribution, you have a click, somebody buys something. To what extent do you think this entire move to more short term was driven mostly by tech?
No, absolutely. I mean, all businesses and I'm sure most marketers are somehow in pursuit of certainty. CFOs hate risk. Everyone hates risk in business. So everyone's looking for something where, you know, there is a clear link and they can prove it and, you know, uncertainty is reduced. And that leads businesses inevitably to go short term because when you focus at the bottom of the funnel, you can see the impacts of what you do immediately. Now, the mistake, of course, is to assume that the impacts are entirely related to what you just did. So I spend €1 on a piece of performance marketing. I get €1.20 back in terms of short-term attributable sales. You know, maybe they can be traced through clicks or whatever, but you've got some kind of model that says, I spend €1, I get €1.20 back. This is good business. This is okay. I'm going to do that. But of course, what nobody in the early days anyway fully appreciated was that a big chunk of that €1.20 you were getting back was actually coming from the investments you had made many, many months, if not years before in your brand. And without that €1.20 would very rapidly start to go south of €1. And this is, of course, what's happened enormously to businesses that have overcommitted to short-term performance marketing is that what starts out as maybe a reasonably healthy return on your investment very rapidly starts to lose it as your brand becomes unknown, invisible, untrusted, unliked. So that's why in The Long and the Short of It and in subsequent works, we've always stressed you have to do both. We're not anti-performance marketing, but the simple observation is that businesses around the world are spending far, far, far too much money of their budget on it. It's not that their budgets are not big enough in general. It's that the budgets are going on the wrong kind of advertising, the wrong kind of comms. It's all bottom of funnel stuff. And if you walk away from your brand, you're not spending enough on the brand. The performance marketing machine starts to lose its momentum and it loses its efficacy. So the two are interrelated, and absolutely, one has to do both. So, and that is precisely what's been going on. And of course, there are other factors. If you go down the performance marketing route, it leads you to particular platforms. Social is big in all of that. The challenges of landing messages on social are enormous. We'll no doubt talk about the cost of dull soon. So it leads you to huge restrictions on the kind of creative you can serve. It's got to be very short form, very propositional, what we would once have called direct response advertising. Don't give me the charm, just give me the selling message, because you've only got a very short period of time to land it. So, the process feeds off itself and exacerbates the problem that we have. Once you go down that rabbit hole of overinvestment in performance marketing, it's very difficult to crawl back, because you're putting more and more money into a machine that doesn't do anything for your brand. And as your brand weakens, the performance machine demands more and more of your money. And this is the vicious cycle that I think a lot of businesses have got into. And eventually the smart ones come to the point and say, hang on, whoa, we've got to rethink, put the brakes on, let's get back and reinvest in brand. But of course, that's a brave thing. You've got to bring the CFO and the CEO with you. You've got to explain the problem. But all I can say is that there are a growing and large number of case studies of businesses that have done that, have rebalanced, reinvested, gone back to building their brand, and discovered enormous success, enormous impacts on their on their performance marketing and on their sales, in total. So it's not just about what you do in the short term. It's about making next year's targets easier to achieve than this year. So you have to do both, and that's the key learning. But we haven't been doing it. We just haven't been doing it. So this is the critical issue, I think, now, and perhaps explains why The Long and the Short of It has begun to get more resonance. Only about 14 years after it was written, I think it's finally to some degree found a.
Yeah, I think what's your perspective on I think John Dawes, but I think Ehrenberg Bass Institute in general says, we have on average you have 5% or X percentage people are in the market, the other 95 are not. That means that, and I think that's basically also part of the message, is you have to build those memory structures also for the people that are currently not in the market, not just those 5%. And the Short of It very much focuses on that 5%.
Exactly. And I think the 95-5 kind of rule as it is, it's a good kind of mental shortcut. It obviously varies enormously. In some categories it's probably not even going to be 1%, in others it might be 10 or 20%, but it's a useful kind of shortcut to explain to people.
Do you know how that happens? Because I think the long and short of it quite often also got translated into 40% this, 60% that, 50%. I mean, that's sort of what happens. So are you happy with the fact? Because I once recall talking to Les about it, and he says, these were like, we had different categories and there were different percentages for different domains, and then it got reduced to.
That's exactly right, and we've always said, and that when we wrote Effectiveness in Context, which was the build on The Long and the Short of It, we specifically set out to answer that question. We said the 60-40 rule. It's not a hard and fast rule. It's a guideline. It's the average balance sweet spot for the average brand in the average category. And of course, there aren't many brands that are average. So you always need to accept that in the category or the position you're in. So, startup brands, the sweet spot is different from mature brands.
Yeah.
Mature brands need more brand investment. Startups can often get away with less, and so on and so forth. Premium brands need more brand, value brands.
Yeah, and if
So
the market is
they're
really,
mostly obvious.
if the market is really rocky, you might change it a bit as well.
And so, I know people have sometimes said, look, 60-40, it's not that simple, is it? And we've always said, no, I agree. But the point about it is, it's like the 95-5 rule. It's a very simple way of landing a very important point that people will remember and they can get their heads around.
Yep.
And I think the danger is we get too wrapped up in, the purity of academic navel gazing and you lose the big picture. And it's the big picture we absolutely have to bring people back to, which is it's about building brands, mental availability, if that's the expression you want to use. It's it's perfectly valid, brand equity, whatever. These are essentially, if you ain't got a strong brand, you're very unlikely to have a strong business, because it drives everything. It drives growth, it drives margin, it drives risk down. Strong brands are much less risky brands to deal with, because they have more consistency of earning potential. So there's all sorts of things that come off the back of it. We just got to get back to understanding that it is even more important in the 21st century than it was in the 20th, and that's the truth of it.
I think the UK market is maybe a bit ahead of the Dutch market in what you just indicated, the realization that some of the brands are rethinking this model and going back a bit. I think there are some nice really IPA cases or FE cases like McCain that showed very nicely, if you do it over time, very long, doesn't even have to be extremely let's say creative, but it just builds the brand, and they take, let's say, the benefit out of that. If we switch a little bit and look at the, we have this data. You've looked at it. There are more people in the market that also look at it. If we look at our current market, I think one of the big challenges for the marketeers is still first the adoption, or to start using those metrics, those guidelines, or guiding perspectives. And the second part is that the way it's being actually translated into what I would call a financial structure. Talk to the CFO, the finance department. That's something that's a really big challenge for a lot of brands still in the Netherlands, that they have less involvement of the CFO. What's the state? What's your perspective on this? Is that happening more in the UK with the return to the brand, or is that still a big challenge?
Of course, it's a big challenge, and I think in many ways it probably marks out the more progressive and more successful brands, is where they have got a rapport, at least, between finance and marketing. And I think the only way to make this work, in my experience anyway, is to be very evidence-based, to have a model and a theory, and to have the backup of science where it can, but evidence, at the very least, to support that. Most CFOs, in fact, pretty much all CFOs, do not come from a marketing background. No. They're very bright people, but there's no reason to expect that they should understand why and how advertising can best deliver. And they do tend to be influenced by, probably their daughters or their sons, who they see being, very digitally focused and not really influenced by mass market advertising, they think.
Yeah.
But the truth is that, all the evidence, effectiveness evidence, Behrenberg-Bass evidence, everyone else teaches us that, you've got to build your brand. And so, and I think if you put that to them, and smart marketers will do that, put the evidence to say, look, building a brand isn't a vanity project. It drives our business. Yeah. They're smart enough to accept that, but you've got to put the evidence to them. My experience is that when you do that, and if you can put a coherent evidence-based argument to explain to a CFO the importance of brand building, they get it. I mean, they absolutely get it. And that, you can at least create the opportunity for a smart CMO to demonstrate the value to the business by putting it into operation. But, you've got to believe in it yourself. And I think, there are some young marketers out there who perhaps even begin to doubt it themselves. They have been sucked into the performance marketing model. It is quite seductive in some ways. It just happens to be wrong. It's as simple as that. You cannot build long-term growth with performance marketing alone.
Seductive.
You can do it for a while with a startup, but it's just fundamentally flawed. And you've got to get your head around that, and you've got to accept whether you like it or not, that a brand matters, and it matters more than ever. And it's going to get worse. People are writing about this now. I don't think it's clear cut, but people are suggesting that if you use AI to do your search and it can provide you with information, the only way it will be influenced is through the popularity of brands and the noise that brands can create out there in terms of content. So there is perhaps an argument to say that brands are going to get even more important in the years ahead, but they're certainly not getting less important. We live in a very competitive, very crowded, very noisy world, and the brand is your way to cut through that and get some attention. Attention, so absolutely critical word.
We'll jump into attention. Seductive but wrong, and that almost sounds like one of my student relationships I once had. But when you look at the knowledge that is available, let's assume that we've talked to our CFO. We found the right balance. We were convinced that with the data that we need to do it. We find a nice spread. Then another area that you've been working on, I think, is what's called the cost of dull. I think you're a year and a half in, maybe something like that. Tell us a little bit about that project, and maybe also what surprised you maybe the most about some of the response that you got to that.
So the cost of dull is Adam Morgan. Adam Morgan's a very old chum of mine. We started out in advertising many, many years ago. I'm not prepared to admit how many years ago. Together, so we've been in touch and we've worked together on and off many times over those years. And I've been involved with his challenger brand business at various points in the past. So he came to me a couple of years ago and said, "Look, Peter, I want to investigate the cost of dull. I think we're all focused on." On the upside of it and we're not looking at the downside of getting it wrong. And he wants to reframe the debate about, creativity and inspiration and ideas. And I immediately could see the value in this. I mean, it's a hugely important way of doing it. So, but it also unlocked a particular issue I was facing with the IPA data, which is that there are more dull campaigns in the IPA data than there should be. It's about effectiveness. And if dull campaigns are there, and there are a number of them, that doesn't feel right. And of course, when I looked at it through Adam's lens of the cost of dull, it immediately becomes clear what the problem is, because the reason there are as many dull brands in the IPA data as there are is because they had huge budgets. These were the businesses that for one reason or another could afford to put an awful lot of money and really weren't asking the question about whether the advertising could be working hard. Now, of course, that's the privilege of generally high margin businesses or, businesses with powerful positions. You won't get away with that in a challenger brand. They don't have the budgets to do that.
No.
So when we started looking at that, the initial phase was very much about the creative side of things. So I looked at the UK data and tried to put a number to how much an average brand in an average category would have to spend to match the dullest brands, how much extra they would have to spend to match the most exciting creative. And we had top and bottom quartile in the data because that's the way that the data worked. So we were comparing the bottom quartile with the top quartile in terms of creativity, attentive power, you might want. And the number that kept coming out was around about £10 million a year. Extra budget an average brand would have to have just to match the effectiveness, not to go any better, but to match it. So in that situation, you have to say, look, you cannot go to a CFO and say, look, our advertising isn't actually very effective, so I'm going to need more money. Give me more money and I can build the business. You can't do that. In the real world, with real brands and real businesses, you have to put right the dull problem first. And so we set about understanding what the dull problem was, the kind of creative, and there's lots of good input then, of course, from System 1, who have identified, the decline of the kinds of highly effective advertising creative approaches, the use of emotions. Now they're looking into the area of surprise, which is another build on that. The right kind of emotions plus the right kind of surprise has always been the dream ticket to what I refer to as fame. Fame advertising is the most potent, gets brands talked about.
Yep.
So you got these big numbers, and System 1 then worked with their data to try and work out what the aggregate wastage of money was for the lower 3 quartiles of brands in the US marketplace, in terms of how much extra they would have to spend to match the top quartile effectiveness. And the numbers are just unbelievable. So their aggregate wastage number was just short of $200 billion per annum. Now, these are not small numbers. That's, roughly speaking, the GDP of Greece. So these are not small numbers. These are huge numbers.
Yeah.
But then we realized, I've worked quite a lot recently with Dr. Karen Nelson-Field and Lumen in the UK, who are the 2 big global attention science companies.
Yeah.
And looking at not, the media side of attention, because it's not just a creative problem, it's also a media problem. At the end of the day, it all comes down to attention. Great creativity cuts through and you get creative attention. Great media enables your message to resonate more powerfully. And Karen Nelson-Field's great contribution to the interface of the two is what she calls attention elasticity, and that is that on low attention platforms, creative never gets a look in. You simply, you can serve the best ad you want on, say, Facebook, and it'll never get watched all the way through because people only really watch ads for 1.5, maybe 2 seconds, depending on the sub-platform you're on. So we decided to do the same. We brought Karen in to look at the cost of dull media. So by which we are quite explicitly referring to low attention platforms. Attention platforms that only give you perhaps on average about a second of attention to an ad. And these are really very strongly, tightly defined windows of viewing. The spread is not vast compared to high attention platforms like, TV, and to some degree, some social platforms, Snapchat and YouTube, of course, non-social. These have much longer levels of attention and generate hugely greater commercial value for advertisers as a result. So she went through the same exercise, looked at the 4 quartiles of different media dullness, and in the US market came to more than 200 billion cost. So the GDP of Hungary was where she came out. So these are vast amounts of money that are basically being wasted by marketers who haven't understood what really matters to effectiveness, which is getting attention for your ads, getting attention to great creative served on great platforms. And it's, ultimately that's what it boils down to.
Yeah, so to sort of, not to recap, but so on one hand we have the dullness of the ad, let's call it like that. And on the other hand, we have the context in which the ad is being served that also differs very much, right? So those are, so even if you've decided to spend on brand and you want to do a brand campaign on Facebook, but your ad is quite dull, you might have said, okay, I'm investing in brand, but you're doing it in that sense then in the wrong way. We recently did a piece of research here in the Netherlands where we put the same ad in all sorts of different contexts, X, TikTok, the local BBC site, and you see that during the research, what we saw was that people indicate that they trust one a little bit more than the other when you ask them. But if you give them a response time mechanism, right, like an implicit association test, you see that the differences are much bigger. So it almost also seems to be that people have a hard time to understand which for them is a more trusted media environment than the other. Is that also something that shows up when you look at the cost of dull? So if I only watch
No,
2 seconds of Facebook, then yeah, it
Yeah,
could be
no,
great.
no, absolutely, no, absolutely. I mean, and I think this is another issue that we haven't specifically yet gone into any great detail on this in the cost of dull, but I've certainly looked at this in other contexts. It isn't just the environment. I mean, one of the reasons, probably the most important reason why dull media impacts effectiveness is because of distractions. You know, particularly on social. You're scrolling all the time. You're doom scrolling. You're constantly moving down. You're not stopping to look at ads. You just you keep it moving. But there is, as you're alluding to, another issue as well, which is, the Marshall McLuhan pretext. Marshall McLuhan, the Canadian researcher in the 1960s, said the medium is the message. And that has become very, very important now. People, I think, increasingly realize that they can't trust what they read on their social feeds. They know that there's an awful lot of, manipulation, misinformation, fake
Filter
news
bubble.
there.
Yeah.
And that inevitably rubs off on advertising. And we see that as well. I mean, I did my own kind of equivalent to that. So what I did is I divided the campaigns in the IPA database into those that had built big trust effects for their brand and those that had not. That's one of the metrics that's reported. And I looked at, compared to median points, whether each of those two groups of campaigns tended to spend more or less on different platforms.
Yeah.
And when you do that, you see that the ones that were least likely to generate trust effects tended to spend well more than average of their budget on social. Social was the big culprit here. Whereas the ones that did achieve positive trust effects were more likely to do it, tended to spend more on, legacy regulated platforms such as TV and radio and so forth, because those are the ones where people do trust the advertising, and for good reason. They know it is regulated. They know you can't tell blatant lies and so on and so forth. So, this is another issue. It's not that you don't pay attention to the ads, but you don't actually believe them often on social. Or at least there is that worry in the back of your mind that, so there are many, many factors, and you're absolutely right. The context is part of the issue, definitely.
And now we see some companies, I think if I go back in time, avoiding to make it a Waldorf and Statler, two old men talking about back in the days, but we got a pitch, we got a storyline, we got a concept, we went into production, and then to put it very bluntly, we just bought some media time on the main TV channels in the Netherlands. Those were 3, and then they were 5 or 6 or 7, and then you were done. Right? You bought them for the entire year. Everything was set. We see a full fragmentation of an enormous amount of media channels. That makes it a little bit harder to have the same level of reach. I mean. So it does make sense, I think, that people try to use all the other channels. Did you find any signals that you could still build, let's say, broader, wider campaigns with that build brands using all those different environments?
Well, first of all, I think the important thing here is we have to kind of qualify reach. I mean, the Ehrenberg Bass Institute for many years has quite rightly been telling us that to build brands, we have to build reach. We have to try and reach everyone in the category. Yeah. The problem is that in a resource-starved marketing world, what that has led marketers to do is to go for cheap reach. When you go for cheap reach, you go for, social particularly, because it's usually the cheapest reach you will get in a market. But what we now know from the attention scientists, from Lumen and from Amplified Intelligence in Australia, Karen Nelson Field's company, is that what really matters is attentive reach, because you cannot build a brand in 1 second. One of Karen's many great findings, and Lumen echo this as well, is that somewhere around 2.5 seconds is the critical threshold at which you start to lay down brand memories. And there are other things as well. The duration of memory starts to build after 2.5 seconds. It's not just that you lay them down, but they last longer. So if you cannot get someone to watch your ad for 2.5 seconds, you are not going to build brand memories. You're not going to build the brand. That is essentially not necessarily wasted money. It can still do the performance marketing bottom of funnel piece, perhaps, though it may not do it particularly well. But you will never build the brand. So buying low cost reach has become a very dangerous strategy for businesses that are short of money. And you will find it incredibly difficult to build a brand on many social feeds. Not all of them. Some are a lot better than others. And, but TikTok is no better than Facebook, so I'm told. So I'm told by the attention scientist. The attention levels are just too short. It's really difficult. And that doesn't mean to say that other tactics like influencers, can't be very powerful. I've become a convert to influencers. I can see the value of influencers on social platforms. The problem is, of course, scaling them. You're going to need an awful lot of influencers if you're a mass market brand. So there's a scaling issue. But, as a way of getting attention for a brand on social, it's infinitely better than chucking paid ads on them, frankly. So, so there are real issues, but some platforms are much better. YouTube is much, much better. You get good attention levels there, and you can do it.
Yeah, YouTube is a very interesting one. I think maybe before we jump into that, if you look at the strategy on social, you see that the narratives that these platforms bring is that they say discovery and purchase are basically now happening in that moment. You see somebody, you see a product, you buy that product, and there you go. It might convert. I completely agree. It will never build your brand. I think it's not possible in that way. We have comparable attention data that also says you need a couple of seconds to actually get something across. What's your perspective on companies like Unilever, for instance? They now say we're going to put all of our money into, not all, or at least half of, at least big chunks of our money into influencers. At least do the influencer marketing. But our data sometimes suggests a little bit that it's good for the influencer, but not always good for the brand. What's your perspective on it? Would you say, okay?
Well, I've been asked that question many times, and I think for mass market brands, and Unilever, these are big brands. These are not niche brands. It's a really brave, and I'd suggest perhaps slightly foolhardy suggestion. I mean, I don't know exactly what their budget split is, but putting 50% of a big brand budget, mass market brand budget into influencers is going to carry a lot of risk with it, because the individual influencers aren't going to deliver. You're going to need a big portfolio of them. You're going to have to try and pick off all your own. You're going to have influencers for older people, influencers for younger people, influencers for people in the middle. It's going to get complicated, and complexity is the enemy, in my experience, of effectiveness. I don't buy complexity. The best brands, the best, most effective campaigns usually have simplicity at their core. And I think that it's vitally important. So I wish them luck. I wouldn't put any of my money behind the success, frankly. I think they will probably rein back. I think they'll probably find there is a sensible level of influencer investment. I think they'll find it has a sensible role in building brands for them, but that it is probably well short of the 50% kind of level of budget, frankly. But then maybe, it's a good experiment to try. Maybe they will unlock new learning and new findings. But, to date, the experience in the marketplace has not really justified that kind of risk. I'd be terrified to do it, to be honest.
Yeah, but I think it's also brave, but at the same time, my view sometimes is that some of these ads, when we analyze them with computer vision, then it's good for the influencer, but the product is just here for a second, then it's gone. Not visible, not long enough visible. So I think it probably builds the brand of the influencer perhaps more than it does actually build the brand of the product.
No, I agree. But I have done some work recently with an influencer company, and I think they're rapidly getting more sophisticated, that industry. And I think they realize these challenges, and they are doing their own effectiveness work on the kinds of influencers that really do work. And, it's like it's a creative process, isn't it? There are good influencers and there are bad influencers, and you need to
Yeah,
make
but
sure that the money goes into the ones that
yeah, that
know
would,
how to land a product story.
yeah, and I think what I find one of the interesting hooks there. Curious to hear your thoughts about this. Is that I, for instance, take pictures, which means you buy camera gear every now and then, and there are a couple of people that I, through the years, have, subscribed to because this what they tell me is a very interesting, genuine story about a product review, and I get to trust them. I'm pretty sure if they would advise me to go with brand A or product B, I would be much more inclined to trust them. So in terms of the trust, I think that it might work.
Yeah, but again, you can see the immediate challenge here, can't you? That they have to be aware of their own brand, and their own brand relies on trust. So if they accept any product placement brief, that doesn't coincide with their own, so you've when it works well, you get an influencer that convincingly can promote a product because they believe in it and because there is a genuine. Then I think it can work very well. But if it's just influencer being bought, it's you're back in a familiar a pattern of ineffectiveness where people just won't believe it. They don't trust. They won't trust the message. So it's got to be done. It's quite tricky to get it right. It's not a simple, easy fix. And that's why I would be nervous about it.
Yeah, I agree. So we briefly touched on YouTube. If I look at my daughter when she's on the couch, she's watching something. We basically have a TV setting, family on the couch watching a big screen. But it is a program that actually runs on YouTube. It's usually a bit longer format. I interviewed Byron Sharp a while ago, and he said it's basically turned into the world's biggest TV station. What's your view on that? The connected TV approach, the YouTube type of approach?
Well, first of all, let me just say the world is getting very excited about connected TV, and I think it's quite right. I mean, I'm very excited myself about the potential for it because I think, it, and if you regard YouTube as a kind of example of it, an awful lot of TV is served and viewed over YouTube now. I mean, even in the UK, it's become quite a big deliverer of it. The point about the connected model is it enables us to kind of join up the dots. We can be targeted, so it can work at the bottom of the funnel, but we can be much more precise about targeting and so on and so forth. So given that it has become ever more difficult to build mass audiences with TV because of fragmentation, as you've said, TV audiences are still there. It's just they're there across multiple fragmented delivery points, and connected TV is obviously going to make that problem worse, but at least we can know kind of who we're getting to better, so you can build up your reach, and their attention statistics are really good. I mean, you get very strong, as you do with normal TV, linear TV. So as an effectiveness platform, I'm hoping that they will enable us to relaunch TV. It seems to be happening in the US. I think it will gather momentum in the UK. It's a relaunch of TV because, it gives everyone what they want. It gives the, reasonably big audiences, big attention, but also the data stream that you need to know, what's going on. So I regard it as a very positive development in the marketplace. My only caveat, of course, is that in the US, it's already being used as a bottom of funnel tool. It's just they're very focused on, because they now have the data to make it operate as a bottom of funnel thing and to measure. And that, of course, is not TV's strongest suit. TV is a great brand building platform with unparalleled attentive power. So, that seems to me a bit of a waste if you go exclusively bottom of funnel. But if you view it as a whole of funnel platform, fantastic new capabilities.
Yeah, in the US they're adding all sorts of live sports events to it, which I think is we're almost back to broadcast TV, but it's just a different distribution channel. which I think is an interesting
absolutely.
perspective.
So yeah, and YouTube, in many ways is helping that. So I'm a big supporter of that. I like, from an effectiveness standpoint, I like YouTube. I do not like most social platforms. And that's the reality.
And have you ever looked at something that we've been discussing here, and sometimes is the what are the cost of attentive seconds that you have? Is we obviously have different channels, different media, different length. We compare everything the same in the sense that we say, okay, we have these standardized metrics, but if you look at the cost of DOL, or at least the different attention environments, some environments have more attention on average. Is there a way to calculate that?
Well, there is, and I would say that I think it is actually quite mind-bogglingly complex when you think about it, because what actually matters, what we should really do is have two models in our mind. We should look at performance marketing buying metrics versus brand building buying metrics, because you're gonna look at different ones. Now, Karen Nelson-Field has quite extensively talked about the stupidity of chasing CPM. She calls them cost per meaningless thousand CPM, because it is meaningless at the brand level. And it's very interesting. I use Lumen data to look at the hierarchy of costs if you chase low CPMs. And if you look at CPMs as your buying buying currency, which is what businesses do everywhere, you will go social. In the UK and pretty much everywhere in the world, I'm told, the lowest CPMs you achieve through social, particularly Meta platforms. TV is pretty damn high. YouTube is somewhere in the middle, and cinema is off the scale. Very expensive. If, however, you use a different metric, one of Lumen's metrics, which is cost per 1,000 attentive seconds, you get almost exactly the reverse hierarchy. TV becomes the cheapest way of doing that. Cinema, not quite as good. YouTube, pretty good, but not quite as good as TV. And suddenly, Meta platforms start to look goddamn expensive. And that's the reality of it. So if you're looking for brand spend, you should definitely be looking at some kind of attentive, cost per attentive unit. If you're buying performance, then CPMs is still probably going to be close, but I would still factor in some element of attention, because you can do more. We know you can do more in a couple of seconds than in 1 second, so you should still factor in a bit, but it's going to be less important. But there is a complication to it, which at this stage in the marketplace I think is unwelcome, which is that the reality is, if you're building brands, it's attention beyond 2.5 seconds that really matters. We know you can play back memories. If you've got a strong brand with strong equities and strong assets, you can use those to trigger memories of the brand in less than 2.5 seconds, but you can't build on them. So you still got to have them. But so when it comes to building those assets, it's really the reach you get beyond the 2.5 second point in the curve. So look, it gets quite complex. And one, in my idle moments, I think you could build a really, really interesting currency model here that values at every point, a different amount. So at 2.5 seconds, the value starts to build. 3 seconds, it's even more valuable, but of course you've got a smaller audience. 5 seconds, it's even more valuable, but you've got an even smaller audience, and so on. So it's quite a complex thing. But someday, someone will probably use AI to build a really valuable model that will teach you the value. And of course, this has got to be done in a microsecond, because it's got to work within, programmatic trading platforms. You've got to bid on a particular impression. You've got a microsecond to do it, and without these really complex models that build in the likely attention that ad's going to get, you're never going to know how much to bid. So look, I think it's a really exciting time, and I think there's huge potential here, and AI is undoubtedly going to play a very valuable part in it, so long as it's fed the right data. And if Meta uses it, they're going to feed short-term data, and it's always going to give you Meta is the answer. You've got to have independent models done by the attention scientists that give you the true value of an impression on a platform. And then this will be massively, massively valuable. It's going to be fantastic. It really will. It'll put right the big, disastrous effects that have been going on in effectiveness over the last almost 20 years now. So I'm quite optimistic about that.
No, I think that's a really good perspective. I completely agree with you there. And also that it has to be independent, because otherwise it will always be, we are always the best option for everybody else.
We've had too many years of media platforms marking their own homework, as we say in the UK.
Yeah,
it's not good. It's not good. Of course it's gonna be good.
Yeah, and if we've done for one of the big four platforms some research in the past where it just didn't work out the way they wanted it, and in the end it never turned up in the research, right? So they did, and it's their research, so they can do whatever they want.
Funny that, isn't it? Funny.
You mentioned AI, which is like the big, let's say, elephant in the room. It's hard to avoid it. Now, I think one of the benefits could be actually creating the model you were just talking about, using all sorts of algorithms in real time. Doing that, I think, is a potential very interesting. Reminds me a bit of the marked mix modeling. It's always a challenge to get the right model and keep it right. At the same time, we see a lot of material popping up. If you talk about the cost of dull, which is AI generated. Well, I'm not sure if the word crap is good, but that might be
it's getting better. It's getting better, isn't it? But it's not great yet.
And so how do you see those develop?
The really interesting thing, just coming back to something you were talking about earlier on, you were talking about the research you've been involved in predicting how an ad would work. And AI, I think, has a great opportunity to do that as well. So we have the potential, I think, to, when we go into this bidding situation, we're bidding for an impression, we can take into account the nature of the creative, because we'll be able to predict, where the eye will gaze, the way the attention to the creative will shape up. We'll know all about the attention delivery of that platform. And so we potentially will have the really exciting capability to say, this ad on this platform is worth bidding, however many cents for or whatever. Yeah. No more than that, we'll stop at that. Whereas a different piece of creative on that same platform, we might bid differently for. Now that's the holy grail I think we kind of need to get to. So there is, I think there's some exciting bringing together of research that's going to have to be done through. I can only see it happening really through AI to work at the speed it needs to. But really interesting. So there are some great capabilities, but there are also some huge downsides to AI. Given, if it's fed the wrong data, I think it creates a credibility around, as we always used to say in IT, garbage in, garbage out. I don't know whether that expression is still used in Silicon Valley, but the trouble with AI is if you train it on garbage data, you're going to get garbage outputs, and that's the problem. And that's so easy to do. But, creativity, I don't think it'll ever match human creativity. I don't think it'll ever really match it. But it certainly enables us to execute great human ideas very cheaply and very quickly. And I think that's potentially exciting. So we can experiment and, and so on and so forth.
I think in one of the interviews you were also in with I think it's Illuminari, or I forgot the exact title, but I think Roy Sutherland said it sort of raises the floor, right? And everybody has a certain capability. They can execute it. You can do it very fast. It's relatively cheap, so it democratizes some capability. At the same time, you don't want everything looking the same. The models are trained on data of current, let's say, human understanding. If you show a human a fuming factory, they will say it's pollution. But if you would have done that in the 60s, they will say this is economic growth. So humans change over time. Those models are not. So it's a very interesting area to keep track of.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the danger, of course, is that it leads to a lot of look-alike. And this is part of the problem with dull, is we have so many brands, so many products, so much marketing thinking that it's all kind of looking alike. And there is a danger that AI will lead to that. At the same time as we raise the floor, we'll also lower the ceiling. So I think there will always be a great opportunity for, wild human creativity, because we know time and time again, the great case studies of effectiveness were based on giant creative leaps, putting 2 and 2 together and making 10, because it was just the great creative mind. And I think we're way, way, way off being able to train AI to work at that level. And we may never get there. I don't know. But
I agree. But you are in the UK market has been, I think, one of the, best markets for the quality of creative work. I mean, I don't even live in the UK, but I still know that happiness is a cigar called Hamlet, right? You can't do anything with that anymore nowadays. I'm not sure if I see it right, but it looks like we've lost the appetite to do a bit of more, let's say, creative or more bold work, or work that stands out, is more distinctive in the last couple of last decade. Maybe it's also because we are chopping up all these larger formats into smaller formats that have their own dynamics. Lots of discussion of being politically correct, right? I think Adland's Progressive Gaze is an interesting book in that sense. What do you see as a causing this rise of more dull, or maybe we should call it the lack of being bold and trying to? Are we afraid to offend people? Do we want to be politically correct? We don't dare to make those big bets anymore. We just do the performance thing. What's your view on that?
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of issues here. I mean, undoubtedly, one of the reasons that creativity has suffered so badly is because if you follow the performance marketing model, if you're influenced by the performance marketing model, it's about it's closing a sale quickly. So the whole business about creativity is about the charm, conversion, the seductive power of the brand. We've learned over many, many decades that the most powerful long-term brand ads are the ones that use things like humor. They create an emotional attachment. And that's a very creative process. If you're influenced by the performance marketing model and it's just about closing a sale, landing an offer, there's no room for charm. There's no room for humor. There's no room for seduction. It's just about sell, sell, sell.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. So that undoubtedly has been part of the problem. And I think as marketers have perhaps realized that, there is no real kind of brand value in that, many of them have reached out perhaps unwisely for some of these associations. You might call it political correctness, or you might just call it they want to make associations with good causes or whatever, because they want something good to say about their brand. And I think in many cases this is done very, very, very badly. But when it is done well, it can be immensely, immensely strong. I was judging some effectiveness case studies recently for a UK news brand, and there's a fantastic case study there for how they used purpose. Brand purpose has got a bad name, but they used brand purpose brilliantly to sell the brand. And when you get it right, it can work really, really well. But most often it was just marketers clutching at straws. They say, look, we've got nothing really to say about our brand. We've lost the plot on brand. So let's just associate ourselves with, green credentials, whether or not it's even true. And that, of course, is or relevant. It's got to be relevant, and it's got to be true, relevant to the business of your brand. So if to quote an example, if your brand is about cleanliness, then you might well find that some message to do with being clean as a business might well resonate with that. But there's got to be a connection between, the purpose that you're seeking to associate with and the business of your brand. And that's why, I still defend purpose, because I think when it's done well, it's hugely powerful. And there's some great case studies. It's just most people cock it up, frankly. And I don't think it's intelligent, frankly, to say because most people are doing it wrong, it has no value. You've got to look for the potential and try and learn from it, and we'll get there in the end. But I think it's quite rightly been pushed back, and I think marketers have been told to go and learn how to do it first and then come back and try it. And some are beginning to do that now. I am beginning to see more and more what I would regard as intelligent, informed, purpose-led campaigns where there is a connection, and they're starting, I think, to therefore begin to get a little bit more effective. But you're right to criticise it, and I think it is fair. A lot of the criticism that's been made of what you might describe as political correctness out there in advertising, just trying to be seen.
I think the Dutch are
a good citizen.
Yeah, they're typically sometimes a bit rude in the way they look at it. But I think we see here in the Netherlands quite some initial feedback where people have a harder time buying the what I would call, obviously we had for a while we had the greenwashing as a term. I think there's a risk that you end up doing the greenwashing, then you do the everything that's related to diversity, inclusion. So you get this very, I would say, average campaign that doesn't offend anybody. It's not funny. It's it ticks all the boxes. And the worst thing is that you can see that somebody has been working on ticking all the boxes. It feels right. I think it doesn't work, and I think so. There's some feedback here in the Dutch market where people are saying, yeah, well, maybe we should go back to having just stupid, funny ads that we remember and that run longer period of time, and that they stick to the key messages for a longer period of time without changing stuff every day.
No, I'm with it. I mean, the important thing is that the ads are well liked, and if people have seen through our attempts to be all inclusive and no longer find that entertaining or engaging, or it gets in the way of that, then I think we need to move on. And being popular, creating ads that people love is immensely commercially valuable. So that's what we've got to get back to doing, whatever it takes. And we know humour still works. We know charm. We know positive emotions still work. They make people like the ads. And if the ad is well liked and it is well branded, and there is a connection between the emotions that we are associating ourselves with and the business of our brand, then it all works. Again, I think there is a slight danger that as we chase after the emotional engagement mantra, because it's well worth trying to do, but that we create so much distance between the business of our brand and the emotions that we're chasing that frankly it doesn't stick. So there is some craft and some finesse to how to do it, but I think good creative people have always understood that and will always be good at doing it. We just need to get back to trusting them and stop throwing too much science and too many kind of rule books
requirements.
If you give creative people the brief of make people love our campaign, and you apply the rule book to ensure that the branding and the connection is there, and you're doing all that, but just give them the brief to make them love us. That's where the gold lies. It really is. That's where
I completely agree. So, having talked about a large number of these subjects, what's ahead for Peter? What are you working on currently? What are the things that you see developing at the horizon, where you have questions, maybe some interests, where you're going to talk about maybe when you're at your next events? What are the things that?
Well, I'm still very interested in the whole kind of dull stroke attention issue, and I'm trying at the moment to work that through to see if we can improve the consistency of our predictability, if you like. So if you can build in creative attention power and build in media attention power, does it better explain the output? So I'm going back through IPA data to see whether if you overlay some of these other metrics, whether you end up with a better predictive power, because we've seen that decay. We used to be able to see very good linkages between these back with legacy media, but now I think we increasingly have to look for those. So I'm still working on all of that, and I think there's huge interest yet to be found in all of that. So that's my kind of area of interest at the moment. But I'm also interested in trying to always work with other data sets elsewhere in the world. It would be great if we could try and prove all of the patterns that we've observed in the UK market with US data, for instance. And who knows, I might get a chance to do that. So, we're still so far from putting the problems right that I'm still focused on, just trying to bring again together a comprehensive understanding of what the problem is and the levers we have to solve it. So I think you'll probably find me talking about and refining the message about attention, whether it's creative or media, for a little while to come yet, because there's so much excitement going on in that area. So that's going to be me for a little while, I think. Good.
So then once we have new data, new papers, we'll reach out again and see if we can do an update. For now, big thank you for taking the time to talk to us. And I think you give a lot of people, also the people here, some stuff to think about and to work in the area. We're doing lots of stuff with attention, so that's definitely one that we will take to heart. And maybe we can dive into some of those data sets and see if we can find something in the Netherlands as well.
Great, it's been lovely talking to you, and I certainly hope that we have given people something to think about, because
I think we should. So thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Bye.